Good morning kids and welcome back to AMC's Garage. Today we're going to be fitting a booster plug to my Yamaha FZ1N. So strap yourself in, let's get on with it. The booster plug. I actually had one of these on my Versys and the thing just transformed the way the bike performed. Throttle response was smoother, engine braking was softer, clutchless shifting was easier, everything was just a little bit more enjoyable. And according to what the box tells us, it can be installed in less than 10 minutes and it will give us improved and softer throttle response, faster acceleration, removed jerky low RPM running, stronger and more reliable idle, and reduced puffing on your aftermarket exhaust. And I can attest to all of these things with the Versys. I loved the effect that the booster plug had on my Versys, that this was the first thing I got hold of as soon as I bought this bike. Let's see if it has the same effect here, shall we? So first off, what do we get in the box? Limited edition backpack with compliments from the booster plug team. Reminds me of swimming class at primary school. And then the booster plug itself, obviously take a closer look at that in a second. A handy booster plug keyring, release the power. Free ebook. The guy that designs and manufactures these has actually written a very informative ebook on motorcycle fuel injection to help you understand how and why your motorbike works like it does. We've got the Calvin pissing on a power commander sticker, another booster plug sticker, and instructions on how to connect the thing. Stick all of that back in the box. Put it in the storeroom. For those who haven't seen the other installation video, I'm going to tell you exactly what we're looking at here. This is the booster plug. In here is some magical electronical wizardry. We plug one end into our air intake temperature sensor, plug the other end into the cable which was originally plugged into the air intake temperature sensor, and then we put this temperature sensor somewhere where it's in good, clean, cool airflow. And that's it. There's no buggering about with settings, nothing, that's it. We just plug it in and go. So let's get it plugged in so we can go, because the sun's out, look at that. I can tell you with all certainty that the air intake temperature sensor is in here on the top of the airbox, so we need to get this cowling off, we need to tip the tank up so we can get into it. Refreshing to see that they're stainless bolts, because they're not as magnetic as a mild steel bolt. There's 3. Leaf it out, and finally the big one for 5. Now we've got 2 Allen bolts either side of the tank. Well, technically, grammatically, 1 Allen bolt either side of the tank. So now we can actually lift the tank up, but before we can do that properly, to get the seat out of the way, release the pilot seat, and then we can lift the tank properly, hinging on this hinge at the back here. I love that feature. Careful not to overstretch the fuel line there. I'm going to use this rubber mallet to prop that in place. It's relatively sturdy. And then that here is the air intake temperature sensor. So it's as simple as unplug that, snip the green cable ties off of our booster plug, and if you watch Ichiban Moto's channel, you'll know that the green ones are by far and away the strongest. Unravel this techno spaghetti, and then we connect this end of the booster plug to the loose end of the air intake temperature sensor cable, and then we connect the remaining end onto the air intake temperature sensor. That is now connected. All we need to do is put this somewhere down the front here where it's going to be in good clean air, and we're good to go. Just going to test something because I've got a bit of a theory here. See, I've returned it back to normal. The original cable is plugged back into the sensor. On this bike, if you press the reset button, it gives us the air intake temperature, which it says is 7 degrees at the moment. Remember that, 7 degrees. So then I plug the booster plug back in again, turn on the ignition. Now when I press the reset button to get the air intake temperature, I think it should tell me it's a lot colder, because the way that this little gadget works is it fools the ECU into thinking that the air is cooler, and that makes it throw more fuel into the mix. Look at that, air intake temperature is now low. It's too low for it to give a reading. So the thing really does work. It's now telling the ECU that the air is much cooler than it really is. So now we need to deal with putting all of this stuff somewhere. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is run the booster plug cable. What I'm going to do is run the main cable down the back of the airbox here, pushing it into that cable groove, and then run everything over to here. Cable tie the booster plug into that position because I'm relatively sure when I let the tank down, yeah, I've got plenty of space under there, as you can see. Nothing's fouling, nothing's touching the tank. Tank back up, and my cable tie fetish once more comes to the fore. Start by sticking those two together, keep things tidy. Poke one through this loom here, grab everything all together, and that's the booster plug in place. For no other reason than being pedantic, and stick another one here around the plug. just to keep these cables from wandering away. Now we need to stick this somewhere where it's going to be getting a good, clean, cool flow of air. So the airbox is here. These holes here are the way through which the air gets through the frame and into the airbox. So what I'm going to do is run this along here next to the airbox, hook it behind that piece of sponge there, through this hole in the frame like that, and then cable tie it to this loom here so that it's protected, hidden away, but also in the air. Little baby cable tie around that, and then tuck it in behind the cables. Lovely. Now we've got a little bit of extra here, so I'm just gonna loop that down into this space. In fact, I loop it around the booster plug so it can't go anywhere. There we go. Lovely. And that is that. That's fitted. Just need to trim off our cable ties, stick the tank back down, and we're ready to go. Tank down. One last check. No, we're getting no interference or anything down here. Check our steering lock is good. It does touch the frame there. I don't want any vibrations cause the metal parts to rub against each other, so I'll just tuck it a little bit further in between those cables. That's better. You wouldn't even know it was there. Had to happen once, didn't it? Let's start her up. So now we've got the bike running at tick over. Seems to be actually a little bit lumpy, so I'm going to wait for it to get warm enough and then adjust the tick over to make that about right. Okay, well actually we're up to 77 degrees now, 80 to 90 is ideal. But our tick over has actually settled right down at about 1250, 1300 RPM, so just leave it at that. Let's get out there and give it a test. So here we are out and about on the bike. At the moment just in the city in Hamburg trying to get through. But so far, first impressions are really good. Already rolling off the throttle, engine braking is a lot softer, there's no jerkiness there. Rolling back on, it's a lot easier to thread the power on without that horrible clonk as it comes back in. If you hadn't already noticed, I've managed to bump into and pick up the other British Hamburg motor vlogger, Bulldog Gaz there in front on his Versys 1000. Oh, I'm so glad I had the time to come out and get a quick ride in as well. What a day! I mean, the air is pretty frosty. Speaking of which, if I hit the reset button on the gauge here, change it to air temperature, it's telling me that it's -6 degrees centigrade, when in reality it's nearer about 8 to 10 degrees at the moment. So that shows us that the booster plug is still doing its tricky little job of tricking the tricky little ECU into sticking more fuel into the mix. But luckily for those of you worrying, and there were a few questions about this on my Versys booster plug install video, the air temperature sensor has nothing to do with the water temperature sensor, so your engine's not going to overheat through having a booster plug, because it's a whole different temperature system. In traffic, keeping up with it, sticking in the one gear, it's a lot less jerky on and off. That's really quite an improvement. Yeah, clutchless shifting much smoother as well. That was not nearly as clonky as the ones I've done before. Yep, vast improvement on those clutchless shifts. And I'm definitely having to use a tiny bit more braking force when I'm stopping, but it's making my deceleration a lot smoother. Oh, there's always time for a quick coffee at Lois, isn't there? So now on the motorway, how does it feel when I roll off the throttle? We're doing 5,000 RPM. Yeah, that's a lot softer for the roll off there. Then to come back on, it's a lot easier. I'd say it's not completely gone away, but I'd say the jerky on-off is about 70% better. Right, 85% better when you're below 4,000 RPM. Yeah, still got a little bit of a kick over 5,000, but when we're dealing with the deceleration cut-off, the booster plug has its hands tied a little bit as to what it can actually do about it, but below 4,500 RPM, feed it on nice and smoothly. So that's a definite improvement. Let's try it on a country road. Yeah, trying it in town was one thing, but clutchless shifts with a little bit more of a spirited right hand are
silky smooth. So the question is, in a bend such as this, oh yeah, it's a lot easier to feather on and off of the throttle. As I said, it's not completely gone, but it's 70 to 80% better. What did I say earlier on? 60 to 85? I don't know, the numbers are just all over the place, aren't they? You get the gist. The majority of the problem is gone. Makes it so much more enjoyable to ride. Once again, the Boosterplug has improved my enjoyment of this bike. Obviously, as already discussed, up to 4,500 RPM, it makes everything vastly better. I can potter along here in first gear at traffic speeds, coming on and off the throttle, and it's not at all jerky. And that was without clutch because I was waving my hand around. Of course, over 4,500 RPM, we're getting into the much known deceleration cut problems programmed into the ECU. So outside of an ECU reflash, we're not really going to be able to fix that. And it's important to remember that even a power commander wouldn't be able to fix that problem. That is inherent in the ECU. You can't override it. But where it counts most, on and off the throttle, when you're tanked over, the improvement is vast. It's much improved. See, here we are, coming off and back on. Yeah, much better. I think that's just about it, but before I go, I just want to explain a little bit about the mechanics of the Boosterplug in case you haven't seen the other video, in case you've got questions I might be able to answer. I touched on it already, but the way it works is it fools the ECU into thinking that the air is about 20 degrees cooler than it actually is. Now what this fooling does is it makes the ECU change the air-fuel mixture to deal with cold air. What it does is it increases the amount of fuel in proportion to the amount of air that's going into the engine, which gives you a better, softer throttle response. It gives you softer engine braking because there's more fuel going in. See, if I let off the throttle there, the bike very softly and very gently begins to brake. But this doesn't mean that your ECU is going to be smashing extra fuel into your mix all the time. Although, like every rap music video extra, there is a big but, and that is that the Boosterplug will only work optimally with bikes that have an O2 sensor installed. If your bike has no O2 sensor, if you have your O2 sensor removed, that's going to affect the performance, and here's why. The O2 sensor senses the amount of O2 which is in the exhaust. The job's in the name. But it does this with a little bit of a delay. The Boosterplug, on the other hand, is constantly telling the ECU that the air temperature is very low, and while you're on and off the throttle, making small adjustments, small movements, the O2 sensor just lets the Boosterplug get on and do this. As soon as you reach the fixed throttle position, the O2 sensor stops ignoring the Boosterplug, opens its eyes and says, hang on a minute lads, something's not right here, and it overrides what the Boosterplug is telling the ECU and adjusts the mix based on what's coming out of the exhaust pipe. So this means your fuel economy is not going to show that much of a change. When I was touring last year down to Italy and then this year through Croatia, which was a very solid mix of serpentines, on and off the throttle, hard acceleration and long sustained cruising, I actually saw no real decrease in fuel economy. I was still getting 50 to 55 to the gallon out of it, and that's Imperial. So there you go. That's how the Boosterplug works. A lot of people ask me in person when I say that I have a Boosterplug in there, how much extra power do I get? The answer is 0. That's not what it's about. It's about smoothing out your throttle response. It's not about upping your HP count. I mean, that said, I'm sure throwing some extra fuel in there, if your bike's set up for it, then perhaps you get an extra half a horsepower or something here and there, but overall, that's not the purpose of the Boosterplug. So there we go, that's the Boosterplug. Once again, I'm very impressed. In all honesty, the difference on the FZ1 isn't quite as night and day as it was on the Versys 650, but it is still a marked improvement for a relatively small investment and not a great deal of time to fit. So to see if there's a Boosterplug available for your bike, check them out at www.boosterplug.com. Once again, I'm a very happy customer, so now it's time to head back to the garage, fit the next thing. I wonder what it will be. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Keep them shiny. I'll see you out there. Ta-ra!